On August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 suffered a horrible tragedy, leading to the deadliest single aircraft accident in aviation history. It was the day before the Bon Festival. Many Japanese were going home to celebrate this occasion with their loved ones. Japan Airlines Flight 123 was a routine domestic flight from Tokyo's Haneda Airport to Osaka's Itami Airport, carrying 509 passengers and 15 crew members on board. The aircraft was a Boeing 747 SR-46, an 11-year-old engineering marvel that had accumulated 25,000 flight hours and 18,800 cycles at the time. Piloting it was Captain Masami Takahama, a seasoned pilot, having logged around 12,423 flying hours, of which 4,842 were from flying 747s. Joining him was First Officer Yutaka Sasaki. He had about 3,963 total flight hours to his credit and had logged roughly 2,665 hours in the 747. The plane was on the fifth of its 6 planned flights that day. Just 12 minutes after takeoff at 6:12 p.m., an explosive decompression tore through the plane's rear, causing severe damage. The cabin's pressure dropped, the lavatory ceilings tore apart, the tail fin broke away, and the aircraft completely lost its hydraulic systems. With no control over the aircraft, the pilots began sending distress signals. The cabin crew kept fighting to keep the plane airborne by manually adjusting engine thrust. For over 30 agonizing minutes, the crew struggled to steer the plane back to Tokyo, their voices betraying the unbearable strain and heartbreak of knowing they were almost powerless. Yet despite their bravery, the situation worsened as the plane began a deadly descent over the mountains. The passengers knew that survival was impossible at that point, so many of them wrote farewell notes and messages to their loved ones. Flight 123 crashed into Mount Takamagahara at 6:56 p.m., killing 520 people, all found in the wreckage many hours later. Initially, over 50 passengers survived, but delays in rescue operations led to the loss of nearly all of them, leaving only 4 survivors. The haunting last moments of Flight 123 and the stories of survivors serve as both a heartbreaking memory and a lesson that reshaped aviation safety worldwide. It shook Japan to its core, exposing major flaws in aircraft maintenance protocols. The cause was traced back to a faulty repair made 7 years earlier. How did this long-overlooked mistake resurface to claim 520 lives that day? Join us as we uncover the truth behind the tragedy. If you're someone fascinated by stories of heroism, heart-wrenching tragedies, and lessons learned from aviation history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us for more gripping content. Now let's get back to the catastrophic events that led to the tragic crash of JAL Flight 123. On August 12, 1985, the day went on as usual at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. 509 passengers and 15 crew members were steadily boarding the Boeing 747-100. The Bon Festival was fast approaching, and the Japanese people were excited to reunite with their families, friends, and loved ones to celebrate and share precious time together. The flight was bound for Osaka Itami Airport, an hour-long journey on the busiest route of Japan. None of the people on board had any idea that the aircraft they onboarded hid a critical weakness, something that had been growing silently like cancer, posing life-threatening danger to everyone. The accident aircraft, Boeing 747 SR-46, was delivered to Japan in 1974 and had been in service for 11 long years. But 7 years prior to the crash, on June 2, 1978, the plane sustained severe tailstroke damages. It was the same route, and the pilot had excessively flared the aircraft upon touchdown at Itami Airport, Osaka. The tail strike cracked open the aft pressure bulkhead. The damage was seemingly repaired by Boeing technicians, and the aircraft was returned to service. So what actually happened on the eventful evening of August 12, 1985? Let's take a look at the timeline of events. Number 1. Takeoff and decompression. 5:12 p.m. The aircraft landed at Tokyo Airport from a previous flight, 1 hour prior to Flight 123. In the cockpit was a veteran pilot, Captain Masami Takahama. On that day, he was serving as a training instructor to First Officer Yutaka Sasaki. Both collectively had logged around 16,000 plus flying hours and were quite familiar with this route. Accompanying them was flight engineer Hiroshi Fukuda, a veteran flight engineer with approximately 9,381 flying hours. 6:04 p.m. Flight 123 pushed back from Gate 18. 6:12 p.m. The flight took off from the airport. Everything seemed normal. As the plane began to climb, it began pressurizing the air, brought in by the engines and fed to the cabin. 6:24 p.m. 12 minutes had passed and the plane was cruising at an altitude of 24,000 feet. The pressure inside the cabin pushed at the aluminum fuselage of the plane. The weakened and faulty rear bulkhead ruptured, tearing a gaping hole in the plane's rear. A huge section of the aircraft's tail, rudder, auxiliary power unit, and several critical components and control systems were blasted off. The passenger's oxygen mask dropped immediately. In the cockpit, the pilots heard the blast, and the alarm started blaring, informing the crew about the thin air pressure. The pilots broadcasted a distress signal, and the captain declared emergency. They decided to turn back to Tokyo and took a right-hand turn approved by the Tokyo Control Tower. The aircraft entered an initial right-hand bank at 40 degrees, greater than observed previously. The captain ordered to reduce the bank angle by turning left, but the plane didn't budge. To their horror, the flight engineer confirmed that hydraulic pressure was gone and the autopilot was disengaged. All commands of banking back and pulling up were going in vain. The plane had become uncontrollable. 6:27 p.m. to 6:34 p.m. The pilots decided to descend, heading towards the Izu Peninsula. The plane kept turning away from the Pacific and back toward the shore, but couldn't turn right completely towards Haneda. Tokyo Control contacted the aircraft again and repeated the direction to descend and turn to a 90-degree heading to Oshima. It was informed that the pilots had no control over the movements. The pilots were experiencing hypoxia as they didn't put on their oxygen masks and didn't always respond to air control or the flight engineer. The plane entered a phugoid motion for 90 seconds, repeatedly climbing and then descending, without the tail fin to stabilize it. The aircraft also began to swing side to side, a dangerous phenomenon known as Dutch roll. The pilots devised to control the aircraft using differential engine thrust, and it slowly wandered back to Haneda. It was of limited success, and the aircraft rose and fell in an altitude range of 20,000 to 25,000 feet for 18 minutes. Number 2. Limited control. 6:34 p.m. to 6:48 p.m. At 6:35 p.m., the flight engineer responded to multiple cell-cal calls from air control. He mistakenly informed them about the broken R5 door, and they were making an emergency descent. The pilots regained some control of the aircraft by adjusting engine thrust. In doing so, they dampened the phugoid cycle and somewhat stabilized their altitude. At 6:40 p.m., they lowered the landing gear using the emergency extension system in an attempt to dampen the phugoid cycles and Dutch rolls further. Their success was short-lived as the pilots again started losing control. The flight engineer asked if the speed brakes should be used, but the pilots did not respond. The aircraft then began a right-hand descending 420-degree turn from a heading of 040 degrees at 6:40 p.m. to a heading of 100 degrees at 6:45 p.m., flying in a loop over Otsuki. The aircraft also began descending from 22,400 feet to 17,000 feet as the pilots had reduced engine thrust to near idle from 6:43 to 6:48 p.m. Upon descending to 13,500 feet at 6:45 p.m., the pilots again reported an uncontrollable aircraft. This time, the aircraft slowly started turning left. The hypoxia had subsided by then, and the pilots began to realize how grave their situation was. Captain Takahama exclaimed, "This may be hopeless," at 6:46 p.m. At 6:47 p.m., the plane started turning toward the mountains. 6:48 to 6:56 p.m. The aircraft continued west and descended below 7,000 feet. The captain ordered maximum engine power to avoid impact. The engine power was added abruptly at 6:48 p.m. before being reduced back to near idle at 6:49 p.m. This caused phugoid motions. Then, the aircraft stalled at 9,000 feet. At 6:51 p.m., the captain lowered the flaps to 5 units to prevent another stall. It took 3 minutes and 10 seconds for the trailing edge flaps to reach 5 units. The leading edge flaps were extended at 6:52 p.m. During this time, air control continued calling via cell call, but the pilots didn't acknowledge the ringing. At 6:53 p.m., the plane reached 13,000 feet and became uncontrollable for the third time. The controller asked the crew to tune in to the 119.7 control tower frequency. While the crew didn't acknowledge the request, it was later revealed that they did switch to the correct frequency. At 6:54 p.m., the flight crew requested to be given their position, which was 45 nautical miles northwest of Haneda and 25 nautical miles west of Kumagaya. At 6:55 p.m., the captain requested flap extension. The aircraft started banking abnormally due to the imbalanced flaps. At 6:56 p.m., the bank angle exceeded 60 degrees, and the nose began to drop. The captain ordered to retract the flaps and add power, but the bank angle continued and exceeded 80 degrees. The captain desperately requested the flaps to be retracted for more power, but nothing was working. The aircraft began a rapid right-hand descent toward the mountains at the bank angle of 70 degrees. In the final moments, as the airspeed exceeded 340 knots, the pitch attitude leveled out and the aircraft ceased descending, with the aircraft and passengers and crew being subjected to 3 Gs of upward vertical acceleration. Number 3. Impact. In its final moments, the plane suffered a backward shock from impact, causing it to roll sharply to the right, lose control, and further drop its nose. The right wing clipped a ridge, severing the remaining parts of the already weakened tail, the outer third of the right wing, and the engines. This impact scattered debris over a wide area, dispersing parts as far as 2,300 feet away. Shortly after, the plane flipped upside down, striking a ridge near Mount Takamagahara, where it exploded upon impact. Number 4. Delayed rescue operation. A U.S. Air Force navigator prepared a search and rescue operation, dispatching a U.S. C-130. The aircraft spotted the crash site 20 minutes after the impact, while it was still daylight, and radioed to Yokota Air Base. However, the Japanese government did not give them the go-ahead to commence the rescue operations. A JSDF helicopter later spotted the wreck after nightfall. He saw no sign of survivors. The JSDF rescue teams set out to search the next morning, 20 hours later. Medical staff later found bodies with injuries suggesting that people had survived the crash only to die from shock and exposure overnight in the mountains. The survivor count was reduced from 50 plus to only 4 women, one of them found alive, hanging on a tree. One survivor, Yumi Okiai, recalled bright lights and the sound of helicopter rotors shortly after she awoke amid the wreckage. She further recalled that she could hear screaming and moaning from other survivors. These sounds gradually died away during the night. Number 5. Farewell notes. In their final moments, passengers on Japan Airlines Flight 123 wrote farewell notes to mothers, children, and loved ones, expressing love and courage amid fear. Some spoke of the explosion and their desperate prayers to survive, while others apologized or offered final words of comfort. These heart-wrenching notes found in the wreckage capture the profound emotional weight of that tragic day. According to Japan's Aircraft Accident Investigation Commission, the crash of Japan Airlines Flight 123 was due to a faulty repair on the rear pressure bulkhead after a tail strike incident. Incorrect riveting and using 2 splice plates instead of 1 continuous splice plate during the repair compromised the bulkhead's integrity, leading to stress fractures over time. Mid-flight, these fractures caused an explosive decompression that destroyed the aircraft's hydraulic systems. Both Japan Airlines and Boeing were criticized for inadequate maintenance oversight and repair quality. In the months after the crash, domestic air traffic decreased by as much as 25%. The story of Japan Airlines Flight 123 is a heartbreaking reminder of human courage against a fast-approaching catastrophe. Despite the tragedy unfolding, the crew continued trying to save the lives entrusted to them. In the wake of unimaginable loss, Japan was deeply shaken, leading to changes that would make aviation safer for generations to come. The legacy of Flight 123 is a testament to the courage, strength, and humanity displayed in its final moments. What's the most heartbreaking part of this crash for you? The notes, the pilots, or the delayed rescue? Let us know in the comments below.